Ding dong. What? Okay. Does anybody know where the bag of pine needles went? That's what's known as a non sequitur. All right, are we not quite ready? Oh, we are ready. Okay. All right, it's Monday morning. This is the second of two lectures today. My name is Ken Turley, and this is going to be a little different than my usual approach, but I'd like to read the theme for the week: Angels, Dreams, Visions in the Bible. Is it possible to interpret our dreams using correspondences? Do our dreams connect us to the spiritual world and loved ones who have passed? Swedenborg approached the interpretation of Scripture in ways similar to his interpretations of his own dreams. This week, we will embark on a study of angel visitations, dreams, and visions in the Bible. Through text study, integration of correspondence from the writings, and our own intuitive connection to the symbols and stories of the Bible, we will work toward a greater appreciation of how the language of the subconscious interfaces with the language of Scripture. Using Swedenborg's dream diary as inspiration, participants will be invited to keep their own dream journals with option to reflect on and interpret our own dreams together. That's a pretty exciting topic as far as I'm concerned, because I've loved working with my own dreams in the past, and I will say correspondence has definitely been a huge part of my relationship to dreams, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Hearing that, for some reason I just focused on visions, and something popped into my mind because I've always been fascinated by this passage. So I'd like to read the thing that I focused on for my topic. And this comes from a part of the Bible that I rarely delve into. This is from Acts chapter 10, verses 9. The next day, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up to the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened and an object like a great sheet bound at the four corners, descending to him and let down to earth. In it were all kinds of four-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." And a voice spoke to him again the second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call unclean." This was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. What fascinated me about that was that God so distinctly said, "Kill and eat." And again, we'll get into a little bit more about that. I'd like to just go back to the beginning of the Bible, and with the idea that I've often heard that God never changes, I'd like to read this from Genesis 1:29. God speaking, I think, to Adam and Eve at this point. "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. These will be yours for food." Then, in Genesis 9, and this is after the flood, God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall upon all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air, upon every creature that moves along the ground, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, now I give you everything. Now, I don't want to start a big conflict, and I really don't want to focus on what's appropriate for us to eat or not, because being a Christian who actually thinks what Jesus said is important, I'd like to read this from Matthew 15. Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen and understand. What goes into a person's mouth does not make them unclean, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what makes them unclean. Whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body. But the thing that comes out of the mouth comes from the heart, and this is what makes a person unclean." So, I would hope that in terms of the discussion of what you eat or don't eat, you do what's right for you, and know that that's not really the issue. It's your spiritual well-being, and you can have whatever opinion and whatever practice you want around food. Just remember that what comes out of your mouth is more important to the well-being of your spirit. And again, my purpose here is not really to discuss diet. My purpose is to discuss the concept of eating in terms of what that might represent in our dreams. So, checking Swedenborg, to eat is to know from perception what is good and true. To be communicated and appropriated. They did eat and drink means the appropriation of good and truth. And while this sentence is a little convoluted, hang with me on this. Uses created for the nourishment of the body include all things of the vegetable kingdom, which are for eating and drinking, fruits, berries, seeds, pulse, and herbs. Also all things of the animal kingdom, which are eaten, as oxen, cows, bullocks, deer, sheep, kids, goats, lambs, and the milk of these, also fowl and fish of many kinds. To eat of the tree of life is the appropriation of good of love and charity from the Lord. The reason to eat corresponds to appropriation is that as when natural food is eaten, it is appropriated to the life of one's body. So when spiritual food is received, it is appropriated to the life of one's soul. To eat is to communicate and be conjoined, and thus to be appropriated. So in terms of that biblical passage, that's the concept of eating. It means to take in and make part of yourself, to ingest it and to appropriate it into yourself. Obviously, just as we take in physical food and that contributes to our bodies, physical bodies, taking in concepts, truths, teachings, we take those in and we make them part of who we are as a spiritual being. So that other part that fascinated me was the order, the commandment to kill. When I went to check out Swedenborg's correspondence around this, there was 4 or 5 pages of references to it, but it was all about humans killing other humans. And very obviously, I would think, to extinguish faith and charity. To kill is to take away the spiritual life. To murder is to deny God, for to do so is to kill and crucify God yourself. Now, if I can stretch this a little bit, in order to get these things to eat, you have to go hunt them. You have to go get them. And surprisingly, to hunt and go capture something and kill it and bring it back and provide food corresponds to teaching the good of life from the affection of truth. But in all things, there's both a positive correspondence and a negative correspondence. It also means to persuade and deceive from the affection of falsity. So whenever you see or encounter the concept of hunting, either in the Word or in your dreams, you have to put it in, use the context to decide for yourself whether this is a good thing of sharing truth and faith for the benefit of other people, or whether this is a not so good thing when it's an attempt to dominate, control, or persuade to something that's not true for one's own well-being. And one last little thing, weapons correspond to doctrinal things of truth. They're mechanisms by which we get something from one place to another for the purpose of getting it in hand and bringing it to ourselves. All right, here's the thing. With these lectures, we're given a topic, and I choose a specific subject, and go home and I prepare my talk. I research Swedenborg and any other sources of information and insight and then put it all together, and hopefully am able to present a somewhat coherent lecture conversation. But this time something very different happened. I chose the scripture passage that I shared with you. I went and researched Swedenborg, and in an attempt to take this into understanding the interpretation of dreams, I hit a dead end. It just didn't go anywhere. I mean, beyond the obvious message about eating, which we've discussed, there was nowhere to go in terms of how to apply this to interpreting dreams. So you've heard the scripture passages, a couple of other biblical references to eating, and I can tell you that there was an immense amount of, as Swedenborg is wont to do, redundant quotes on the correspondential meaning of eating. And the inescapable conclusion, when you couple that with the scriptural references, and particularly the words of Jesus, is that we should eat whatever works for us as individuals, because what we eat has very little to do with our spiritual well-being. But it just doesn't go anywhere beyond that. So I didn't really know what to do, but as I began to think about this image of Peter and being told, don't judge what God is offering and wants you to do, what in Peter's case, what he wanted you to teach and who he wanted you to teach it to. I began to think about it, about eating as referring to taking in and making your own the things of good and truth, and the sharing of food as teaching or preaching or whatever you want, lecturing, whatever you want to call it. And it's clear the message for Peter was that he was not to dismiss what he was to teach, and more importantly, who he was to teach. And I realized that I had been dismissing something inwardly that I had been feeling I wanted to share. But because it was not right on topic, the topic I had agreed to, I'd been dismissing it as inappropriate. So I began to think that perhaps the message of this passage was suggesting to me, as well as Peter, not to dismiss for reasons imposed from the outside what I was being called inwardly to share. So with that in mind, I'm going to just share some random thoughts that have been rolling around in me. These are suggestions for you to consider when it comes to understanding your dreams, and perhaps even in reading scripture. They've been helpful for me, and maybe, and I emphasize maybe, they'll be helpful for you. So please, however I may state these, hear these as suggestions, not facts. something for you to consider. All right, the first thing, and I'll try to say this in the inclusive way, our dreams are our own. It's our inner self, our soul or our subconscious, attempting to communicate with our outer self, our waking self, our conscious self. And because it's an internal conversation, it's more than likely going to speak in visuals, words, events, and images that have some meaning to us. That it's an attempt with ourselves to communicate with ourselves. So it's likely that it's going to use a language, whether you realize it or not, you're familiar with. Now, this may well be Swedenborg's system of correspondences. And I would say that there is an inherent consistency between the spiritual and the material that makes correspondence something a bit more tangible than a random or arbitrary kind of symbolism. The thing about correspondence is that the quality and nature of a thing in the physical world corresponds to the quality and nature of a thing in the spiritual world. It's not just an arbitrary, well, this will represent this, and what this is and does and functions is similar and representative of what this does and how it functions, material world and spiritual world. So if you're familiar with, maybe even a reader of Swedenborg, then it makes it all the more likely that your dreams will try to speak to you through correspondence. And if you've engaged in or begun the study or take up the study of correspondence, it increases the likelihood that this will be the vocabulary your dreams speak to you with. On the other hand, it may also be a very different kind of image and symbology your dreams speak to you in. In any case, when considering what a dream may be trying to tell you, your own life is the context from which you should approach understanding your dream. And whether you feel or think it is on target is the ultimate litmus test, not what somebody else tells you it's supposed to mean. One of the things that's been true, at least most of the time for me, is that dreams in color are about what's going on presently in my life. Dreams in black and white or in drab colors are often referencing something from my past. But all the characters, places, events in a dream are part of yourself or the process within yourself. It might have something to do with interactions with someone else, but rarely, if ever, are dreams we have about what someone else might be going through. Now here's a couple of examples of correspondence. A house or a building is representing your being and all the different aspects, the different areas within yourself. The living room and kitchen are likely to represent current activity, places where things happen and things are made or interactions take place. The basement is likely to be your subconscious and memories of the past, someplace you don't go that often and it's maybe a little dark and spooky. The attic, on the other hand, might represent your higher mind, your aspirations. Again, a place you might not spend a lot of time, but it is there and it is accessible to you. Again, you have to decide if this rings true for you. It's entirely possible, given your life experience, that a house, particularly if it is a specific house you have history with, is something other than just you. But it is still almost certain it will have something to do with you and your life and a place or a state of being that you are or you have been. Take the concept of traveling. I've had many dreams of running, fleeing from something, desperately chasing me and just barely able to get away. I've had dreams of flying where I'm flapping my arms desperately and I'm 3 feet off the ground and I just can't gain any altitude. This might be taking place in a vehicle of some kind. So ask, is it self-contained like a car or bicycle? Or is it public like a train or a bus? Maybe you're just walking or running or even flying. In any case, all of these will be about your life journey, moving from one place to another, one state of being to another, a process in the context of your life. Possibly making progress or major changes in your sense of self, your inner being, or as in my case, desperately trying but not being very successful. It's almost certainly not about physical location. Almost certainly about moving, progressing from one state of being to another. And how that is or is not actually happening, and as a result, affecting you. Again, and I'll say it again, in understanding your own dreams, you must be the judge of what rings true within you. While others may have interpretations and offerings of meaning that are worth considering, you and not them are the final judge of the dream's meaning for yourself. So, oh yes, I forgot a page here. Oh, a little bit out of order. I understand. Somebody must have shuffled our talk, Sage. A couple of other things. Parts of and functions of the body. The heart and the head. Feelings and intuition. Thoughts, memories, and reason and logic. I don't think these need any further discussion. Eyes, perception and understanding. We even say, somebody says something, we say, oh, I see, meaning we get it. We can see it and we understand it. Eyes perceive light, and light corresponds to truth. Now, we always say truth because that is what we hope and want it to be. But we must remember, just like water, like anything, there's a positive or negative correspondence. It is probably more accurate to say, when we refer to water and light, that they correspond to information. Because then we have to take and let the context and perhaps the quality of the element in the given situation direct us to understanding it as representing truth or falsity. Ears are interesting. Again, it's taking in and conceptualizing, but there's a response, even behaving in response to what we're hearing. Excuse me, not just behaving, but obeying. Swedenborg says obeying, but depending on the effect of the sound we hear, it may be attractive and positive and move us to affirming what it is calling us to, or it may be repellent in some way and inspire us to a very different kind of response. In any case, hearing is a very different kind of perception than seeing. Sound, particularly music, has a way of reaching us in a way that slips past and underneath the rational mind and touches us at a very heart-centered, intuitive place. It's one of the reasons why listening to music while you're studying can be effective, because it opens up your intuition, and while you're reading or thinking about intellectual concepts, there's almost like this sort of oral magic carpet that slips things into our inner being with bypassing the intellect. A couple of examples of how this might work. I grew up listening to the Beatles. I can still remember hearing their first song on the bus on the way to middle school, and I loved their music. I mean, after the first listening, often it was so foreign I didn't like it, but 2 or 3 listens I was totally hooked. But it was only many years later that I realized in those early years just how simplistic and inane most of their lyrics were. I wasn't experiencing that music with my intellect. It was completely with my emotions and my feelings. And here's another one that's kind of a little more personal. In my past, I had an off-again relationship with a woman for a number of years. And it was only in the final stages when we'd broken up and got together and broken up and got together, and that we'd been apart for a while, and I was struggling with why I couldn't seem to just end this. There was a night when she called me on the phone, and I answered, and I heard her speak, and it hit me. It's the voice. Hearing her voice got me in a way that completely destroyed my rationality. It rendered anything I could think or knew to be true irrelevant, including my better judgment. Finally, hands. Hands represent working, doing something, accomplishing something practical and useful. Feet and legs represent our connection to the earth, our foundation, our connection to the place we live, our place on earth, and also our means of making our way through life. Another very common source of imagery in our dreams is about wildlife. Birds, again, I'm sharing you my understanding of Swedenborg's concepts of correspondence. Birds correspond to thoughts. We can observe birds and we see them flitting around in the sky, which represents our conscious mind, what we can see with our eyes. And just like our thoughts, birds are here and there and chirping here and there and there. Every once in a while, one noble thought flies through. And so look at birds as representing the different kinds and qualities of thoughts that are constantly going. Fish also represent thoughts and concepts, but in our subconscious mind. We can't usually see fish. They're under the surface of the water. However, there are times when we can reach down in one way or another and bring them to the surface, even venture ourselves a little way into our unconscious and observe and capture a fish and bring it back to the surface. And at times, even eat it. In other words, take a concept that we can draw up from our subconscious, take it in, and make it part of ourselves in a useful way. And I mentioned hunting and fishing, the teaching and preaching, to go out and engage life, capture, bring something back, and turn it into something of a useful thing of love and wisdom, to feed ourselves and our friends and family or whoever. But again, context may tell us that it's representing the means and the power of speaking falsities and deceptions, and usually for one's own selfish gain. 2 closing thoughts. Often our dreams are left incomplete. For some reason or another, we wake up before they've concluded. The story is concluded. So ask yourself, how would it be if this dream were completed? What would you expect the conclusion to be? also ask yourself, how would you want the conclusion to be? Some have even suggested in doing dream work that you can return back into the hypnagogic state in a kind of waking dream state and take yourself past that point the dream ended and either discover what comes up or even create your own ending of the dream the way you would want it to be. It's an interesting experiment when you're working with your dreams. To understand our dreams, we must think about them and analyze them, even studying correspondence and learning the meanings of things. But we must also pay close attention to the feelings that they engender within us. For these feelings about the nature of our dreams are just as important and relevant as our thoughts and our intellectual observations. And at times our feelings and intuitions may be an even more effective path to understanding their meaning than the intellectual examination of externally imposed definitions. So I will end there and open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Ken. I have the mic, so I'm going to talk first. I just want to, and Ken will famously probably not remember this, but when I was in the Portland church, and one of the first times I was going to speak, you said, because I was very nervous, and he said, well, think of it this way. People are coming in for a meal. They might be expecting Chinese. You're serving spaghetti and meatballs. Maybe they weren't, it wasn't their favorite, but it was food. It was food for them for that moment. And that was a great help to me in knowing that all of the spiritual sharing that we do is food for one another. And it's okay if people don't all get excited about what the menu is.
Yeah, you don't have to eat it if you don't like it.
Exactly. You don't have to eat it. Other comments and things to share?
I'd actually like to draw something on the blackboard really fast. So this is just a little bit of, okay, so this is a brain, right? Great. So one of the things, and I swear this is relevant, one of the things that neuroscientists think is one of the reasons why we dream is because our brains are so plastic that if we had the amount of sleep that we needed at night with our eyes closed, our visual systems would start to shut down. So when you look at someone dreaming and you measure what areas of their brain become active, it's the visual areas. And you get something called the dream network. So this is the primary visual cortex, and this is the temporal lobe. And the temporal lobe is associated with profound spiritual insight, visions and things, but it's not the rational part of your brain, which is up here. And the thing is, as you're dreaming, as these stories progress and get more complicated, you're activating, you start with the dream network, which is all back here, and then as you get more and more engaged in the stories, the front of your brain starts getting engaged and you wake up because the rational thinking part. And so really what you're seeing in dreams is you're seeing this part of yourself that's underneath the rational part. And I think that's why it connects us to correspondences so much, is because really what we're doing is we're able to analyze and look at the unfiltered part of our consciousness. And I think that's exactly where correspondences come from. But thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi Ken. What if you don't remember any dreams? I think there's been 3 times in my life that I remember my dreams. I know I dream, but I just don't remember them at all. I wake up and I'm refreshed or I'm exhausted, one or the other, but just don't remember.
Well, I'm tempted to give you all kinds of answers, but I don't really know.
So this is Guard Perry with an answer.
I should have known, should have known.
Hey, it's not the answer you think. No, this is in support of the idea of a dream group. So I'm not speaking for myself at the moment. There is instruction that's offered by a very skilled facilitator in the form of Ted. And he's facilitating a group at 3 o'clock. And he would probably say, have a pen and an open piece of a journal next to your bed, and your conscious mind will thereby be speaking. And this is theory that's out there. Will speak to your unconscious before you go to bed, and very respectfully, your unconscious may very well respond with a dream. Hey, thank you for asking. I'll be happy to dream for you tonight. So that's an invitation to anyone to think a little bit now that we do have a very skillful individual. I want to say Ted Curry, but of course he isn't Ted Curry. He's Ted Klein. And I want to say Ted Klein, but he's Ted Cole. And if you haven't met him, he's a really great guy, so sage, girl, a woman. Hey.
Okay, we have someone on the chat, so I'm going to just read this for everybody to hear. This is from Carol. This was very illuminating for me. I particularly enjoyed the idea that as we learn to think in correspondences, we can open to that language. I'm a sound sleeper and do not often remember my dreams, but the ones I do remember have involved the same unfamiliar places throughout my life. I do not like looking at my dreams. Perhaps I should. Could you talk a little more about that language? Not sure exactly.
Well, what I would say is that, as I made a brief reference to it, is it is possible to intentionally explore your dreams. If you wake up from a dream and maybe it was uncomfortable or something, before you get up and you're in that hypnagogic, kind of half awake, half asleep, you can kind of do some intentional exploration of the dream and maybe go up to the edge of the place that you're uncomfortable entering, and then decide, maybe I'll just screw up my courage and go in and see what is there. Or maybe, you can do whatever you choose, but there is that time in waking up that you can choose to explore your dreams somewhat consciously and intentionally. It's an interesting state of being to be in. That's what I would say about that.
Carol says, need to run now. Thank you all. Blessings and love. Thank you, Ken. That wasn't it?
That wasn't me.
That was Lynn. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Hi, this is Randall. Thanks, Ken, for this. It's been very interesting. I haven't been dreaming much lately because I haven't been sleeping much, unfortunately. But I remember years past having dreams that were very vivid, and I'd wake a little and then enough so that I'd go, who was that? Or something like that. And I try to go back there, and there's never a visualization of the face of the person that was in my dream. And I wondered about that.
I would ask the question, first off, I start with the assumption in interpreting dreams, just as I do when I read the Bible, that every aspect of it is an aspect of myself. So when you are asking a question about the identity of that person, I would focus in on not who is that person, but what aspect of myself is that? And it may just, it is saying there's an aspect of yourself that you don't recognize. And maybe you should make an effort to meet that person. And
One thing I've learned about remembering dreams and interpreting dreams is that it is a practice. It's not something we all necessarily just know how to do, and that you can build the skill of remembering your dreams. It's not just going to come necessarily. Some people it does come very easily. Some people it doesn't. But it's a skill that anybody can build if you do. There are a few simple things to know, which the number one thing is don't immediately jump out of bed. Don't immediately jump out of bed. Stay in it as quiet your mind as much as you can and see if any flash comes to you. Try to get as many of the details. A lot of them will be elusive, but anything you can get, and then write it down. And if you do this day after day after day, over time you will begin to remember more and more of your dreams. And there are people who train themselves to be very good at this, and there are also people who train themselves to be able to do lucid dreaming, which is dreaming that you are somewhat conscious through. So just to say, this is a kind of a practice and a skill that can be built over time. But there's just a few tips to know about how to do it.
well, one thing I might just bring to our attention is I was fascinated by when the disciples asked Jesus, why do you always talk in parables? Why don't you just tell straight out? And the sense that I get from that is, first off, he doesn't want to overwhelm people with something that's too hard to take. And at the same time, speaking in parables means that you have to want to know what it means, and you have to apply your attention and your understanding to discover the meaning in it. And I often wonder if dreams don't function in the same kind of way. It is our unconscious speaking to us, and yet maybe there's a kind of sense of not wanting to overwhelm us with a truth that we aren't prepared to handle. So it puts it out in the symbology of correspondence, and maybe is a little fuzzy and hard to access because it's requiring us to really commit to the intention of understanding that dream, which speaks to whether or not we would want to pursue that as a practice. It would take intention and regularity, if not discipline.
Hi, this is Sage. I just wanted to share, Kathy Spies, one of my favorite colleagues, also often shared the opinion that, yes, we can practice it, and that the idea that dreams are still doing their work, the dreams are still doing their work in us, even if we're not aware of them. That it's a choice, just like any spiritual path, to engage with them more deeply, but not to feel like it's an obligation. It's an opportunity, just like all opportunities in life.
Hi. I was just thinking about my dog, because a lot of times she sleeps and I know she's dreaming and barking and running.
Just about to catch that rabbit.
Oh, I know. It's like, I just think it's so funny. But so, I think the brain has to keep working or something, right? It's a function of our biology, right? It's not just all meaningful, maybe.
It's not just what?
It's just not all full of meaning. I mean, it's almost like part of our system, our biological need to
I don't think those are mutually exclusive.
No. I mean, I just thought about that, because like the dog isn't going to think about its dream
No.
later.
Well, we're assuming. We don't
May-
really know, do we?
Yeah.
I can answer that a little bit. The thing that I was saying about neuroplasticity, they know it takes about 40 minutes for a part of your brain that's specialized for a certain sensory system to switch to operating a different sensory system. So, you know, if you blindfold a person and give them something to do with their hands, it takes about 40 minutes for their visual cortex to start processing information from their hands. So this has a lot to do with the neuroscience of dreaming, that that 8 hours of sleep, over 40 minutes, you would start to lose functionality if you weren't, exercising the sensory areas. Now this goes for like natural world senses. It also goes for your spiritual state, because your brain is the form of heaven. And so how do you maintain a spiritual mental vibe, a spiritual stage where you were, and a sense of individuality throughout this constantly changing system? And so for a dog, it's a purely sensory thing. But the more frontal cortex stuff you get, the more kind of individuation and personality you get, the more psychologically relevant they become. So I love this neuroscience. I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, but I...
Any other comments or questions? Or oh, there's a hand.
There's a hand.
Just like a
Making me crazy. Randall again. Just a quick, cute little thing that happened to me the other day. A sad thing. I found a baby bear dead on the Kankamangas Highway, and it had just been hit, and I got up, had to stop a little ways up the road, put on my flashers, and wave people around it so it wouldn't get hit again. And I went over and made sure it was truly dead so that it wasn't suffering, and I pulled it off to the side of the road. Got back in my car and went up and reported it to a ranger, and they were going to take care of it. So that night I came home and was dreaming about this bear on the side of the road, and all of a sudden I had this thing about this mother bear being in the woods, and it was just this flash of it, and I woke up and thought, oh hell, it never occurred to me be worry about the fact that maybe
That was the first thought in my mind. You're braver than I am.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. So all my concern was only for this baby bear, but whew. Anyway, thanks.
We drove past that baby bear. Oh, you did? On the way up here in the bus, we drove around that baby bear, and I looked down and I saw it, and I was like, Lord, send somebody to pick up that precious baby off the highway. And he said, you! Because I couldn't do it because I was on the Greyhound bus. So thank you.
And the angels kept the mother bear at a distance, so you can be grateful for that.
Thank you very much, Ken. We will be meeting back in this room at 11 for discussion group. Hope you will join us and dream on.